在5月底香港举行的 Vin Expo Asia 酒展上，除了各个国家产区的酒庄到来，国际知名的真空取酒器 Coravin 的创始人 Greg Lambrecht 也带着最新和升级版的 Coravin 产品来到现场，成为众多业内伙伴的打卡点之一。乐酒客也趁此难得机会采访到了 Greg Lambrecht。
I think the wonderful thing about wine preservation systems in general is that they allow you to serve great wines by the glass to your guest, to make them happy. The advantage of the Coravin system are many. The first is it's very simple to start using. You buy one device and you can pour from every still wine that you have. It doesn't take up much space. You don't need multiple devices, a single device, and you can immediately start a really great wine by the glass program. The other advantage of Coravin is the length of preservation. We've tested Coravin all over the world with winemakers and sommeliers with wines that have been accessed for years, blind tasted against wines that were just opened, and they can't find a difference. So you can be confident that when you're offering your guest a great glass of wine, that it's as fresh as an unopened bottle. So I invented Coravin, honestly, for myself, to drink great wines by the glass at home. So I always knew that there was a really good market for it amongst the wine consumer. I want to have a perfect glass of wine any night of the week. My spouse may want to have a different wine. And when my friends come over, I want them to be able to taste exactly what they want, not just what is already open. So I believe there's a very strong market. And what we've seen worldwide is that the way Coravin starts in any country is at the wineries and at the restaurants and wine bar. But then when the customer sees it at a winery or at a wine bar, they start to think, hey, wait a minute, I could do wine by the glass at my house. And so the longer we've been in a country, the higher the percentage of our sales are to home consumers. So for example, in the United States, more than 90% of the purchasers of Coravin are home consumers. So I'm confident that in every country, we will get to the consumer eventually. It's like your chef's knife. You can use it at the restaurant and you can use it at home, and it's equally as beneficial. So there's two big parts that made Coravin possible. One is my other job. I work in medicine, inventing new medical therapies. The first two medical devices that I developed involved a needle. So I got very good at needles that didn't do damage to things when I was young. I think the other part of the invention was necessity. I absolutely love wine, but one of the things that I love most about wine is the great variety that it comes in. I wanted to be able to try wines from Ningxia, wines from Bordeaux, wines from South America, and I wanted to taste them side by side. But in order to do that, I had to remove the cork, and all of a sudden oxygen gets in and the wine's quality deteriorates. So I needed a new way. And then of course, my wife at the time was pregnant and she stopped drinking completely. So the necessity became even bigger. So I remember sitting in my kitchen with a bottle and a needle thinking there's got to be a way I can use this needle to get wine out of this bottle. And that's how it happened. Well, some of the difficulties with developing the first Coravin were that every wine is different. And so I had to find the wine that was most susceptible to change, the one that would oxidize most easily, the one that was most delicate. And so I had to search the world of wine for what we call the hardest test. That was part of it. The other part was making the system perfect. I wanted it to work with wines from the 1960s, and whites and reds and natural wines. So I had to find the perfect combination of components, needle, gas, the pressure that we use, that had the least impact on the most number of wines. So that's why it took me 11 years of testing and development to get to the right combination. Great, so we founded Coravin with what we now call Timeless. Timeless uses a needle to go through the cork and an inert gas, argon, to push the wine out of the bottle into your glass so that it never touches air. And then when you're done pouring, you pull the needle out and the cork reseals. So you can drink that wine even years later. We work with a lot of restaurants and wine bars, and they loved Coravin Timeless, but they said, you know what? It doesn't work with every wine closure, like Vinalock, at the time, screw cap, T-tops for sherries. And they said, can you make something that pours faster, is easier, never wears out? I don't need the wine to last for 5 years, only 1 month. And so we came up with the Pivot. Pivot is our latest still wine system. It works with every wine closure because you remove the closure and place our stopper. And instead of using a needle, it uses a big tube. So you place the tube through the stopper, press this button, and argon again pushes the wine out into your glass. Its big advantage is the wine pours very fast. So in a busy restaurant, you can pour quickly. The wine will last for 1 month, but its advantages in ease of use are great. The final system was the hardest to develop. Coravin Sparkling. Coravin Sparkling preserves champagne and sparkling wines for 1 month or more, down to the last glass. It was a very challenging task because every bottle is different, every wine is different, the pressure on every wine is different. And so we wanted to make something that even the winemakers couldn't tell, that would allow a restaurant, a wine bar, or a lover to serve all the great sparkling wines by the glass. We use a universal stopper to close the bottle and a charger that repressurizes the bottle using pure CO2 gas. Those are our systems. Sparkling wine was the biggest challenge that we've had. It took us 8 years to develop this system. The challenges are that sparkling wines have a different amount of pressure on the inside. Prosecco is very low at about 2 atmospheres. California sparkling can be very high at around 7 atmospheres. So how do you find a pressure to restore to the bottle that doesn't make Prosecco too bubbly or California sparkling too flat? That took us about 2 years to discover the right pressure to set. The other problem is when you close a bottle of sparkling wine, you have to ensure 2 things. One, that no oxygen ever gets in, and the other, that no CO2 ever gets out. To find the right material to seal the bottle was another 1 or 2 year effort because it had to work with everything. The final challenge was that we wanted to be able to fit on every single bottle of sparkling wine. Sparkling wine has been around for more than 300 years, and the number of different types of bottles has increased dramatically. So to make something that fits on Krug, but also fits on Gosset and Baresh, these different producers and their very different bottles, was probably the hardest challenge. And every single winemaker said, you must make it work with my bottle, because they wanted to sell their wines by the glass. The great news is that it allowed me to taste. I had a really good pandemic, so I was testing with all these wines. So when we were developing Coravin Sparkling, our test was that it should last at least 1 month. Blind tasting, nobody can tell. The hardest wine to preserve is something called Pet Nat. Pet Nat we could preserve for a month. Champagne, blind tasting, 3 months, even 6 months, seems to be doing very well. The longest I've ever kept a bottle of sparkling wine was 1 year. I've had 2 different bottles that have been preserved for 1 year. They weren't identical to a just opened bottle, but they were very good. So it was wonderful to be able to drink them. But with the average sparkling wine, between 1 and 3 months. The best way to get the longest preservation of your wine is to make sure that you're using Coravin correctly. We call it the 4 C's of Coravin: clean, clear, cellar, and cork. Clean. You have to wash your Coravin. It's just like a wine glass. It's touching wine and it gets dirty. So at the end of the evening, if you've used Coravin, hot water through here to clean out the valve and the needle. Just put it under the sink and run hot water through it. If you've used your Coravin for a long time and never washed it, pour vodka in here to kill everything that's growing on the inside of your Coravin. So that's cleaning, very important. Clearing. Just before I go to the next bottle, I give the trigger a quick press, and that pushes the wine from the last bottle and any air that's on the inside of the needle out, so I don't inject that into the next bottle. That's clearing. Cellaring. It's very important with Coravin, like with any wine, to store the wine on its side and keep it cold in a dark place, like in a wine fridge and cabinet or in your cellar. Keep it stored on its side. It's better than keeping it stored upright. And then finally is cork. If the cork is no longer good, is no longer elastic, Coravin will not work. So the way that I check if the cork is good, I put my hand around the neck, my thumb on top, I push on the cork. If the cork moves, don't use Timeless. The cork is already too old. You do those 4 things and your wine should last for a very long time. How do you get the most out of each Coravin capsule? It's just like driving your car. If you drive really fast, you won't go very far, but you'll get there quickly. If you drive slower, you get better gas mileage and you can drive further. Same is true with Coravin. So the way that I use it, I clear the needle just very quickly before accessing the wine, push the needle through the cork, tip the bottle sideways, put my finger here. Multiple little presses on the trigger is much more efficient than holding the trigger for a long time. Each press pushes a little bit of argon into the bottle, and every time I let go, that argon pushes the wine into your glass. When you stop, you want to minimize this sound. The louder that sound, the more gas you wasted. So that's the right way of using it. The wrong way is to hold for a long time, pour very quickly, and when you tip up, a lot of wasted gas. Don't do that. I have had the great fortune of doing 3 very long-term blind tastings with Coravin. One was 14 years after the original access. It was a very simple Rioja from Spain, and blind tasted it with a group of professional tasters. Nobody could tell the difference. Just recently, I did a 20-year blind tasting with a very inexpensive Australian Shiraz with a bunch of very professional blind tasters in London and could not tell the difference. So if you've used Coravin correctly and you've stored the wine well, the cork is okay, wines can last for a very long time. So our top markets are where we started. So the United States is our #1 market. Our #2 market goes back and forth between France and the United Kingdom. Our #4 market is Australia. There aren't many people in Australia, but I'm convinced that they all drink wine. China was one of our fastest growing markets. The pandemic has changed everything in China like it has everywhere else. And so we're hoping that we can recover in China. And I think what will help is that the domestic production of really good wine in China is always increasing. And whenever our country is a great wine-making country, Coravin does really well. I have been fortunate to be coming to Hong Kong since 1991. I have been here many, many times. This is perhaps one of the world's greatest wine cities. And I've also had the chance to go to both Shanghai and Beijing. Shanghai is an extraordinary wine market with interest in wines from all over the world, as you know. And so I think there's a great desire for good preservation in both China and in Hong Kong SAR. I think what's unique about wine in Hong Kong is the incredible availability of extraordinary wines. I have never seen more better bottles being opened on a daily basis on the planet than in Hong Kong. And so the interest in Coravin in Hong Kong in particular is in use with very old wines. Champagnes from the 1950s and 60s, which you don't see anywhere else. Burgundies from the 1930s. It's incredible how Coravin is used here. These are some of the most delicate wines, and so I think they create the biggest challenge for preservation. So when I talk to wine consumers in Shanghai and in Hong Kong in particular, they always are asking, how well can I use my Coravin with very old wines? And I always say, I'm happy to teach you as long as you invite me. There are 2 ways to look at the cost of preserving a wine. One is the cost of the system that you buy to preserve the wine. And like with anything, quality makes a big difference. And quality and price are very strongly associated. in wine preservation. So the best machines that exist to preserve wine are on the high end. Coravin is in the middle to the low end of the cost of the best machines. There are also very many products that are available on the low end that are very inexpensive to preserve wine. Sadly, they tend not to work. And so with wine preservation, like with many things, if you really want great preservation, you have to go to the better end, better quality, and that implies a higher price. But amongst the best systems, Coravin is not so expensive. The best way to see how well a system is working in wine preservation is to do blind tasting. The way that I developed Coravin and all of our systems was by doing blind tastings. The way you do them is you access a bottle and pour wine from it using whatever the system is, preserve the wine, and then come back to that same bottle 1 month later, 1 year later, and you blind taste it against another bottle of the same wine that has not been opened. I like to do what's called a triangle test, 3 glasses, have somebody else, your friend, pour you 1 or 2 glasses from the previously preserved bottle and the rest of the glasses from a new bottle. If you can't tell the difference, you know that the system works. With Coravin, that's how we've confirmed how long our systems work. The winemaker blind tasting their own wine 1 month, years later, cannot tell the difference, then we know that it works. There are very few systems that can do that.
Greg 用他的专业、严谨、热情为葡萄酒世界开启了全新的葡萄酒保鲜体验，期待卡拉文在中国市场有更好的未来。